Cape Breton in Nova Scotia. We had very, yeah. Sure. I am. This is the very first page. Okay. Sure. Okay.
This is what it's like to go to like a local city TV broadcast.
Yes, this is exactly what would happen. So it's okay.
Breaks. You
Yeah.
have to sit there through the commercial break.
Yeah.
Well, what you guys didn't tell everybody, there was bloopers after all of this.
Yeah, that's right. The blooper reel's coming up.
No, this will be deleted, right? We're gonna. Yeah, or it will be.
Okay, we're good to go.
Oh, sure. So they'll have a name a face to put to it. No problem. Okay, my name is Cora LeBlanc, and I am here representing a small community TV station in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. Our name is Talil Community Television. I do come from partially French community. I unfortunately do not speak French, and I apologize. I am shaming my ancestors. Just a slight little bit of history. We were formed in 1994. It was born out of the resourcefulness of its residents and their need to respond to the collapse of the fishery, which we were very dependent on at the time. It's unique in Nova Scotia and one of only 9 such stations in Canada. We do hold a broadcaster license. Talil has 3 full-time staff and 1 part-time staff, so we're very lucky in comparison to a lot of other community TV stations. And our main source of income is a TV bingo, which is held once a week live on air. We started very small. This was the space that we rented out originally. It was an old hotel that was refurbished, and we lived mostly, our studio was in the basement where you can see the big windows, and the offices were upstairs. Eventually, after 10 years or more, we decided, hey, we need something bigger and better. So eventually land was purchased, not too far away. And then, of course, the work began to create a studio from the ground up. And of course, none of this happened overnight. It was many years of planning, many years of fundraising, coaching, begging, borrowing, stealing from whoever was willing to fork over anything to us. We did begin a very long-standing relationship between Talil and CBC. It just so happened at the time we had a couple of retired CBC workers working with us, and therefore we got to talk to some rather nice people there that unfortunately their names have been lost among the shuffle, so I can't tell you who they were. But they did help us. They supplied us with a lot of our equipment. The rack that you're seeing there was all decommissioned equipment that CBC no longer needed, that we were very grateful and very thankful to take it off their hands. And it is still in use today, believe it or not. I don't know how old it was when they got rid of it, but we've been in the building for about 7 years, I believe, so it's still going, mind you. Some tweaks here and there and some patching, but it works, and we're very grateful for that. And this is what we look like today. This is the outside of our building that we managed to secure, and we built it to our specifications. So we have a few offices, an editing suite, and the biggest part of the building, of course, is our studio, which is in the back of the building, which is very high ceilings, and so it works for us. In keeping the building going, we do have quite a few other relationships that we keep ongoing, and we have to remain friends because you just never know. We deal a lot with CBC Radio 1 out of Sydney. Because of where we're situated, if you turn on your radio at home, you're going to get CBC Halifax, which I'm sure a lot of people here don't really know Nova Scotia if you're not from the area. But Halifax is very urban-centered, and they're about 4 hours away from where we actually are. Sydney is actually closer to us and would have more contact that would be context or contents that would be more reflective of what we would want to hear in our small community. So we've worked with them that we get a feed currently through the internet of the CBC Sydney. Equipment that, again, we were lucky they provided it to us. So all we had to do, they fixed it, sent it to us, we hooked it into our station. So now we deliver CBC Radio Sydney. So if anyone wants to hear the Sydney radio, they turn on our channel, and behind our bulletin board, you hear the CBC Sydney. At the same time, the main times that we will play them is during their morning show and during their drive home show, which is the biggest contact when they do their news and their interviews with local people. There is another local radio station. Their name is 1015 The Hawk. They play a lot of contemporary, younger generation music that I don't necessarily listen to, but some people do. And there is a French non-for-profit community radio station in our area as well that we do play. We play them at night, and of course, over the weekends is what we let play. So they do help us as well to, part of our mandate being in the area that we are is French content. And they certainly help it. We've done a few shows with them. We'll go to their studios and we'll film them if they're doing interviews in French with other local people or just things that are important to us. We will film it and air it so it helps us both, which is just another part of building relationships and building partnerships with people in your community. We have to. None of us are a standalone, really. You need to be able to work with people in your community. You need to make everyone kind of want to help, make them owners of your content and owners of what's happening over the airs, because no one else is going to do it. I mean, Eastlink is the cable company in our area, and they don't really care what's happening in Almadam. They don't have to. It's not on their radar. They do have community TV, but again, it's community TV based out of Halifax. So it doesn't really help the lobster fishermen or the shrimp plant workers. They're not concerned about what's happening in Halifax. They want to know what's happening in their own backyard. So it's up to us to help give them a voice and help them feel relevant in what's happening in their day-to-day lives, because they are. They're what keeps the community going. And that's about it for me. Thank you.
What's your coverage area? Like, what's your population that you cover?
The population.
Use the mics just so.
Her question was just, she was wondering about what our population, what our area is. Just based on our over-the-air channel, we would reach probably between 4,000 to 5,000, depending on, our population, of course, is declining. Right now, we are being carried on Bell Satellite, so we do, of course, have so they tell us the tagline from Bell is we have 1.3 million possible viewerships. Who's tuning in, we don't really know. We do get phone calls. We are very lucky. People in Ontario would like to play our bingo, and we have to tell them no. They cannot. Even though they can see it, they're still not allowed.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. I was wondering if what kind of content you exchange with or your partner with CBC.
Normally, it's just radio feed that we get from them, and we air it for them because the radios at home were blocked. We don't get the Sydney radio, which would be more relevant to our area, and we've actually had municipal councillors do interviews on the Sydney radio station. But without Talil in our area, you wouldn't hear it. If you turn on CBC, you hear the Halifax feed. So that's the content that we get from them. And I think Ivan as well.
Hi, I just wondered how many hours you're on a week or a day.
Usually,
actual, without not counting the televac, but the actual
shows, like
show,
programming,
yep.
actual shows. Right now, we run anywhere between 50 to 60 hours a week. Unlike commercial TV, we don't necessarily have very specific slots. Like we don't have 50 minutes a show and 2 minutes commercial. We run the show. So a show can either run for an hour 15. We're not limited to very specific time slots. We kind of make it up as we go. Depending on the show. I mean, some interviews can last 40 minutes, some interviews, or some shows, variety shows. We do a lot of music shows because that's just what our people want to watch. They want to hear local singers, local musicians. Sometimes the shows last an hour, sometimes they last 3, and then we'll break it up. We won't play 3 hours of show at one time. It's too much. So it really depends.
We do sometimes.
I do?
No, I'm just fooling. I was just wondering, you start at a specific time in the mornings, though?
Our shows, normally we do an exercise show every morning, usually around 8:45, and then we'll do another show around 9, and then we'll kind of run for part of the day, and then part of the day we'll run our bulletin board.
Yep, thank you.
No problem. Was that it for me for now? We're good? Okay. Thanks.
We have a lot of community media practitioners and former practitioners in the audience, so I would like to open up the discussion to everybody. Maybe should I just quickly run through some of the ideas we had that may even make you guys think about how you could build out what you want to build out in your communities and improve your infrastructure. And I think the moment is ripe in one way, and that's because with the new federal government and the federal elections that we had, CBC and public media became a part of the conversation, and the Liberals, actually, the new Liberal government made a certain amount of promises, not only to the CBC, but also to the arts. I don't believe there were any strong commitments to community television, but I would recommend that people in the room think about the commitments made to public television and kind of get yourselves in under those under that umbrella, because of course, as I said at the beginning, I think the mandate is largely shared, right, of serving the public. So obviously we'd want to even have more money, and we've been talking today about funding mechanisms, and there'll be more discussion tomorrow about a public fund specifically for community media. But I think it's really important to make sure the government understands that community media is part of the broader offer of public media in this country, and it should be also resourced and supported and regulated appropriately, which I think we all can agree it's not particularly well resourced, supported, or regulated right now. So one of the reasons Kathy of Cactus and I got to know each other when our union was undertaking a big campaign to try to save the television transmission infrastructure across the country that CBC decided to shut down starting. They announced plans in 2006 to shut down basically the whole repeater network across the country of more than, hundreds and hundreds of repeaters. And we thought that those repeaters should, if CBC wasn't going to keep them going, those should be made available, the towers where they were CBC-owned towers, the towers and the transmitters themselves should be made available to the communities for use by the communities, either to set up their own community television station or to use the tower for other forms of broadcasting, and even maybe for Wi-Fi provision, because of course these are public benefits that were built in the 70s through public money as part of the CAP program, the federal government's CAP program, I think Canadian Access Program or something it was called, to try to make sure that public signal was going to reach every community under 1,000 people, or over 1,000 people. So we were working on this, and Kathy was very interested in how community programmers and community groups could use this infrastructure. And so we decided to think about not just transmission, but how other partnerships between public and community stations could work, or public and community organizations could work. And so she was thinking, Telil is mentioned in the paper as a good program sharing arrangement, where Telil offers relevant local programming, radio programming, over the television, over their television signal, because geography prevents it from happening over the radio airwaves. We also looked at places where CBC is not particularly present for the local communities yet. At the time, the Hamilton station, the so-called Hamilton digital station, was just opening up. But for example, there's no radio frequencies available for any new stations in Hamilton. And one of the television, the only local television station, was at risk of closing at the time. And so we thought that it would be interesting if CBC opened its new digital station and co-located with community groups that were looking for their own radio station, and figured out a way to not only provide professional programming, but help nurture some community-based media at the time. That didn't end up working out, but it's still an idea that I think would be relevant in Hamilton to increase, quality local and community access programming in Hamilton. We also looked at the case of Kamloops, which lost its CBC over-the-air programming back in 2006 when it was what is called an affiliate station. It was a private affiliate station with Pattison that was running CBC network programming and had some local news. Pattison disaffiliated from CBC and joined up with, I think, first Rogers. Maybe it's actually just Rogers. No, first with Global and then with Rogers. And so now people in Kamloops, or starting in 2006, people in Kamloops could no longer get free over-the-air CBC service. And it's a fairly sizable community with no free over-the-air CBC service. And so the community was interested in thinking about, A, how to get its CBC signals back, but also how to get, there's a university there, the Thompson Rivers University, which has a journalism program. There's a community radio station there. They were trying to think about how they could also augment local community access programming. And so our hope was that CBC opening up its radio station could co-locate perhaps at the university and help build some capacity for more community programming. Again, that didn't end up working out. But I think what the experiences in Kamloops and Hamilton tell us is that if we want CBC to do this, it has to actually be an explicit part of the mandate when CBC, if it ever has the money to expand again, and we hope it will, that becomes part of the mandate. Because the other place we looked at is Kingston, where CBC does have, some fairly now passive plans to develop more of a radio presence. Kingston is a fairly large community in Ontario that's not at all served by a local CBC presence. Again, there is community radio station. Christiana, I think, is here from that radio station in Kingston. It's a campus community station. But the newspaper, a long tradition of newspaper in that town, the Whig Standard, was bought up by the Quebecor chain and basically gutted over the last 10 years. It's now under the Post Media chain, but it hasn't, the resources there for local coverage have not been put back into that community. So it's a place that's really lost from the private sector end of things, local coverage. And we thought that it would be a wonderful opportunity if CBC was going to move in to, again, for some co-location and some sharing of resources to ensure better coverage. And I think that should still be a consideration if CBC is going to expand in any community, to look at how it can help build capacity for the community to also participate in making its own media. The final case we looked at was a big city case, because this is, obviously it's a problem. Local media access is a problem in smaller communities that don't currently have very good local coverage. But we looked at Vancouver, which is a place that obviously has public and private professional television stations. It has a cable community station that will carry community access programming. But we thought about the media co-op and other sort of independent media in the downtown east side, which is it's a low-income part of town that also has a lot of Indigenous people living in it, and a lot of poverty as well. And we thought about, the fact that these community and independent media organizations set up in the downtown east side, in part as a response to the fact that they aren't well covered in the mainstream media. And it struck us that a partnership between those independent media outlets in the downtown east side, including they're making video, that is sometimes aired on the community station, but a partnership between CBC, for example, and maybe even Knowledge Network and the Downtown East Side would be a way, would provide a way to transfer some actual media making skills to the community and transfer some more community-based knowledge to the CBC to improve coverage of the community. And so that, in our view, is one of the things that a closer partnership between a community media outlets and community media production facilities and the public broadcasting facilities can have in a big city, which is just to improve connections and links in the community that you may not get organic links out of a professional media service, right? So you have to actually develop those in different ways. But you know, I don't know, maybe Deepak, you have thoughts about how CBC could help you folks in Westminster get off the ground on air. I mean, it's just, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I know that you guys are trying to figure out how to expand what you can do in Westminster, which is a suburb-ish of Vancouver. So you should use the mic. And anybody else here who's either just thinking about this stuff or who's Gary can tell his story about Hay River, which I think is also excellent. So I just encourage you to join the conversation. We have 2 mics, so you can feel free to.
The reason I'm here is that we are in New Westminster, which is near Vancouver, and a part of the BC Lower Mainland. We are thinking that maybe a relationship with the library, New Westminster Public Library, might be a productive relationship. That conversation is just beginning. We've had the conversation which says we should talk. But what I'm hoping to hear at this session is some of the issues that might come. You know, as we're a registered not-for-profit society, and we do have a real need for resource, and we sustain ourselves with a few donations, some corporate donations. Our city helps us. But mostly it's on the backs of a few volunteers and the equipment that my production company happens to own. We have to get beyond that. And I'm looking for ways of expanding that. And the library struck me as a particularly good institution. It's a very honorable, well-run institution. I like the people there. And I'm wondering now, what are the issues of getting into that administration and having something more formal? So that's my open question. I don't really have much thoughts beyond that at this point.
Speaking of a library, we had a situation where we started making historical tapes we called Celebrating Seniors. They were about an hour to an hour and a half of a conversation with seniors in the community. And the library got very interested and actually put up a corner in the library with a remote headset and a TV in the corner. And they were at that time on VHS. They had a VHS player. And people could walk in there in ones and twos and watch any one of these tapes. We played them on intermittently on the TV, but they all knew we had them, so if they wanted to go and watch. And we did do a program or two, different kinds, but we have one called Flipping Pages, where young people, 12 and 13 years old, actually critique a book or 2 books and then come back and give us a half-hour program on their critique on these books. Very, very interesting. So there is a little bit of, and in listening to things this week, I think probably there could be a lot more go on between the two, because we're right side by side. Like we could actually go live from the library. We're that close to the library. It's in actual logistics, we're right there. So if we had to run a hardwire, we could run a hardwire. It's that close.
Susan, I think, may have an answer to that question. Or,
well, as you know, and we were talking about yesterday, I worked for Coast Cable, which is a small community, Sunshine Coast outside of Vancouver. You can only get there by ferry. So it very much has its own demographic feel to it. It's got a population all told of about 27,000, three main little towns of about 8,000 each. And so we were based out of the high school. And I don't know how that evolved. At the time when community television was first being set up, they had a very active group of individuals, a lot who came over from the mainland, and a lot of them were ultimately retired CBCers as well from the what's the name of that show? Beachcombers. Right? There were a lot of beachcomber people there. So there were a lot of media savvy people there, retiring there or whatever, who had bought houses because they'd ended up living there for 17 years producing the show. So and it still goes on, and it's an excellent relationship because they gave us room to build a studio. So they gave us a great space to build a studio, and then a classroom space. They would dedicate 2 teachers, one to teach audio because they had somebody who was trained in audio, and the other who ran the media production program for grades 10, 11, and 12. And that worked really well. We had a mobile. We would go up and down the coast, and it had to be replaced after a while because it was becoming a risk on the road. But it served the community very well. And I told the story yesterday. But there's also, so if anybody wants to talk to me about that, I'm happy to put you in touch with the people there. They're fantastic, very small group, but very well connected in the community. And it was a great feel because you would see the mobile going up and down the coast, and you would know what festivals they were going to, and the manager knew everybody, I'm sure. The other thing is that I was at an opening sometime in the past month for the Roundhouse Community Radio Station in Vancouver. And from the sounds of it, I actually thought it was a community radio station. So I went to the opening of it, and I saw them carrying commercials, and I thought, oh, you're not supposed to be commercial on a community radio station. So I asked them, the programmer, and I said, are you a community station? She said, no, we're commercial. We got a license that there was a frequency that opened up a few years ago in Vancouver. I don't know what opened it up. They bid on it, but their mandate is to be very, very local, and that's the basis that they won it on, was to be this community radio station. But they are commercial, and they're based in Crosstown, which in Vancouver it's not that far from the downtown east side. It's sort of an sort of warehousey area that's becoming more trendy. It's getting gentrified slowly but surely. So to me, I think it's going to be a very interesting scenario to watch, because if they are commercial and they are community based, are they going to be profitable? They're selling advertising, but what impact is that going to have on their programming? How welcoming are they going to be, or are they going to program from their own perspective? And it was just like, ooh, okay, are we starting to see that even the local community sphere is getting commercialized? Like, is there now movement into that? So anyway, I just wanted to mention that because I thought that was a really interesting development.
Anyone else have any specific experiences working with a library? Because of course that is a key. Any kind of municipal infrastructure like a library would be a key public private. Yes, maybe John Savage would like to speak to that. That's a key public community partnership would be with working with a library.
We just had our session next door, the last one, about that, and so my role as a librarian in special libraries was to work within an institutional library, but I brought the concept to Kathy as a potential partnership for some of the efforts of Cactus to try and use the library as a platform to build community media centers on. If you had to reinvent the whole model that cable company, or where cable companies, BDUs, are in control of community television today, you wouldn't have done it without a library being involved in that. It would have made no sense to actually have the corporation in charge of it. Basically, the whole regulations are based on railway transportation law, because the CRTC was born out of the Canadian Transportation Agency, which used to be the Railway Board of Commissioners. So that's no surprise. But I mean, if they had to redo it today from scratch, probably libraries would have been the obvious platform to build it on and not a for-profit enterprise that the BDUs are. The other thing I can say about it is in the mandate of all libraries to be involved with any kind of information in their community. They're supposed to be analyzing the information needs of their community, so that they're supposed to be partnering with organizations on delivering programs. And so it's very easy for anyone to go to their library and say, I would like to do this program. Could you be involved? Sometimes if you get a library that's quite innovative and progressive, they may become the champion and house your community media center in their own facility, or they may be just a very valuable partner to help you out in locating other groups to partner up with and be able to leverage their own political and funding networks as well. So in that respect, I think a library should be a natural partner you can look to. And the thing about building in with an existing operation like a library, it's always easier to partner with an existing organization than to invent one from scratch. They have that network that can be used to build the critical mass in your community of people of shared interests. So that makes it a lot easier to approach your politicians, the CRTC, and whoever else that can support that effort.
The other nice thing about working with, say, a library or a school, which I think, Susan had the experience of working with the high school. We've talked in the Toronto case, because there's some talk about trying to set up an independent community station in Toronto that really reflects the community and isn't just a Rogers branded fake community station. And we've talked about partnering with all the various film and television and journalism schools in Toronto, because there are a number of them both at the university level and the college level in Toronto, and having this kind of dispersed web of production sites across, because it's a big region with terrible traffic, so you wouldn't necessarily want to have for public access, you wouldn't want to have a central production location in a place like Toronto, right? But one of the nice things that I think about being partners with a library or a school or some other public infrastructure is that you're not trying to partner with the competing media organization. And so, those organizations that don't have their own form of media are probably interested in partnering with somebody that can help them get the word out about the stuff they do, right? So in some ways it's motivation. If you can offer them that sort of media connection, it's motivation for them to partner with you. So it is definitely, if you're trying to expand your capacity or build some new capacity in a community, I think it's very worth, as John says, starting with places like the library and the school.
So for those of you that weren't at that session next door, that we had a librarian or a fellow working out of the library of Fort Worth, Indiana, and an excellent operation. It's in a mature state. It was founded in the 1970s, and it's continuing along. And it was given a whole wing of the library there, and it's a fantastic example of how libraries are now integrated. That library is integrated into its community, and they have more people using their library, probably because of that, than the Chicago Public Library System, and they're only 250,000 people there. So, but anyway, I was just going to say that the thing about libraries is they're already hardwired into your community, and they're funded by public dollars. The reason why I came to this session, though, is I'm curious about CBC. They had their $130 million cuts a couple of years ago, and which is almost equivalent to the amount that's being spent on community television by the BDUs. And it's interesting how the CBC was saying that this is going to impact their documentary filmmaking and grassroots documentary filmmaking. And I thought it's kind of funny that, you have $130 million that's cut from a organization that's well managed in developing these programs, and yet $130 million of money that the CRTC has set aside for community television that's largely unmanaged. Only every so many years the CRTC will have some sort of hearing to discuss the management of it. But if that $130 million of community television was better spent and better managed, don't you think that that could be used for grassroots documentary filmmaking, especially if it was combined with an archiving capability, so we don't throw our Canadian heritage out every so many years when the cable company decides to throw our national heritage in the dumpster.
Is it in when you want to answer to him? No. Okay, just maybe part of the answer. In Quebec, we also have an interest of for documentaries, and CBCs are cutting. Last year, we went to the Assemblée Générale de Radio-Canada à Montréal, the AGM of Montreal. It was in Montreal, and where the director said that it's not my fault, I have to cut, and it's gonna be, and we met Mr. Cormier, who is in charge of the CBC French part around Montreal, and our TV is South Shore of Montreal, very South Shore, so South Shore that we are more near from Ontario than Montreal, so, but the CBC have, just before this AGM, have put in place some team, the South Shore team and the North Shore team to do some news. And when we met the South Shore gang who have done some news, we were at the same place, doing the same interviews with the same people for the same enterprise, community, internet. We have giving internet by air, and we said, how come you're there and we are there? And we're doing the same thing at the same time. So we asked, why don't you tell us what you need, and we're gonna give you some news, then you're gonna pay our TV for that. Maybe it's gonna cost less than your 3 people who are with their trucks and everything. And Mr. Cormier was open to that. But since that, he didn't have the authorization to negotiate something with us. So it's starting. And at the same time, we, in Quebec, we have started a documentary laboratoire du documentaire qui s'est préparé et qui demandait est-ce qu'il pourrait y avoir des partenariats entre Télé-Québec ou Radio-Canada et les télés communautaires pour qu'on puisse avoir des sous pour faire du documentaire et le mettre en ondes dans nos télés communautaires, dans nos télés publiques. Et là, on a fait un pas en avant. On a rencontré, le laboratoire a rencontré un paquet d'institutions, CBC, tout ça. Et on essaie de mettre en place un processus au Québec là, de laboratoire, mais en même temps, on a demandé à toutes les associations canadiennes de se mettre ensemble pour pouvoir être plus fort, demander que CBC joue un rôle plus grand dans les régions où est-ce que des télévisions communautaires puissent avoir des partenariats ensemble. Alors, like you have it with your radio, you ask them with TV. Because in Quebec, instead of the only place that we can put some producing machine in library, it's the Montreal library. It's the big one, have everything. You can put some projection, they have seat, they have books, they have internet, but in the rest of the Quebec, just for, you can imagine, last year, the Minister of Education said that doesn't bother if we don't buy some new books to the library this year. The child not gonna die for that. So since that time, a lot of library have closed because the library are inside the school, most of them. So they have to close the library. So it's going to be hard in Quebec to have partnership with library because they don't have any more place. We instead of Montreal one and the Quebec one, it's that's my commentary. I already have. Okay, you got two meaning in stereo.
Thanks, Gary. Over the last couple of days, I've become a little more optimistic than I was before I got here. So I think things are going great. But every time somebody wants to know a little bit more about CBC that happened in the Northwest Territories. I'm from Hay River, Northwest Territories. We're on the south side of Great Slave Lake. We look after all the television in Hay River. We have no cable provider. And all of a sudden my phone started ringing off the hook. Why did you shut off CBC? We had nothing to do with CBC. Why did you shut off APTN? We had nothing to do with APTN. What happens in the north, CBC looked after APTN. When CBC shut down, they shut down all APTN. So all of a sudden we got two channels off the air. So I said, okay, I'll look into this. So I looked into it and I found out that, yeah, they were shut down. I made a few phone calls and said, well, people of Hay River would like them back, both channels back on the air. Your equipment room is located right across the hall from us. Could we get it from you? Well, no, you can't have that. Okay, so I started doing a little research, and I looked at their submission to the CRTZ. One was their equipment is old, obsolete, they're going to throw it away. Two, analog and digital. Had to go digital. No, you don't. It's all analog up there yet. The other was they're going to notify every community affected in advance. They didn't do that. So I started a few more phone calls, and I started a bit of an email list. I started looking at email addresses of people up higher a little bit in CBC. I copied them on all my emails. I must have hit a nerve somewhere, because about 2 days later, sure, you can have our equipment. So we got it free of charge. I phoned Winnipeg, the head of APTN, and I said, did you know you were off the air? No. I said, it's part of CBC's, right? Yeah. Well, they turned off yours too. Oh, okay. Anyway, said, can I have your equipment? Sure. So within 2 days, we had both CBC English and APTN back on the air. And CBC was really quite nice. They went into new receivers for their whole system when they shut down them when they went digital, I guess. So they loaned me two about 2 years ago. So they shipped them by plane right up to Hay River, and we installed them and got them up and running. And so everything is running good. As far as the equipment, as far as I know, all their equipment hasn't been surplused. It's been sent back to the people they bought it from. Probably 25 cents on the dollar. We get our equipment from a place, and I don't go to individual suppliers, but the supplier in the West, and there's not too many around for analog equipment anymore, it's called Technologics. That's where CBC got all their equipment. So they sent it back to them. So in the West, all this equipment is sitting on his shelf. And you can get it for peanuts. I got a bunch of backup equipment now from him that CBC returned to him. So maybe if somebody's looking at wanting to get it back on the air somewhere down here, is to find out where did CBC send their equipment? Because you may get a heck of a good deal. And I'm sure if you can't find it in the East here, hey, these guys are located in Red Deer, Alberta. They'd be glad to sell it to you. And you'll get it for peanuts. But anyway, I think what I mentioned before was the long and the short of most stories with the CRTC or people like the big cable companies is read their submissions. Their submission totally misled. In our minds anyway. They didn't contact us. They talked about digital, which small communities, down here, you don't have change. But the submission said they had to. So anyway, if you're still looking at wanting to get back on, I think you probably could. But anyway, that's sort of our story, and everybody's happy that they're both back on the air, and so are we.
Excellent. Great story. Well, we have a bit of the opposite problem in Toronto in that you guys have no shortage of frequencies, and you're all still on the analog. In Toronto, there are really very few frequencies left. And in fact, Industry Canada has frozen the television frequencies pending some kind of allocation plan coordination with the United States, which could take many years. And so I was just talking outside earlier with the woman who's sort of coordinating the Toronto efforts to get a community station that would be different from the Rogers cable station. And we've always talked about going on the air, because if you go, well, it's over the air or off air as they call it. If you are off air, then the cable company, the cable system has to carry you, but you can also be reached without for people who just have a receiver without having cable. But with the frequencies frozen, one of the other partnerships we've been looking at is to share with digital frequencies. You can easily split the 7 megahertz of allocation into many, many different stations. In some cases, like we know of situations, say in Southern California, where a licensee in San Francisco has about 12 stations on a single frequency. They're all sub-channels, so it's channel 12.1, 12.2, 12.3, et cetera. And he runs, and it's a commercial enterprise, and he just runs multilingual stations. So, you know, one will be in Tagalog, one will be in Japanese, one will be in Urdu, whatever it is. And they all run on the same frequency. And so what our thinking, we should be able to do that in places like Toronto, where, did that mic not work? Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. Oh yeah, there you go. That we should be able to do that, to share frequencies with either TVO, which is the provincial public broadcaster, or CBC or Radio-Canada, the federal ones, the national ones, in order to get a community station on the ground. So that's one of the new ways, if you're in a frequency poor area, that you might be able to get on the air, if we could ever convince them to do it.
You're talking about Toronto and a station with a few possible language variables. I think it's really important to know that the GTA, as they call it there, includes a whole lot of municipalities. And those different municipalities actually have very different concerns. I'm familiar with the Lower Mainland of British Columbia. In New Westminster, we have our own municipal government. We have our own issues. The big deal issues for us involve local bridges and how we connect with Surrey, how we connect with Coquitlam and other communities. And in fact, we have very, very different social agendas. We're a very tiny urban space. Our neighbors are huge territories that have 4-lane highways and all that kind of thing. And so they approach development very differently. The conversation is different. And I think that it's important that we look at community program areas as opposed to license areas. The program areas be focused on the right size of community. And I think municipality makes a lot of sense. And so we should be really, and we could, in fact, the technology exists that we could be all on the same channel. People in Coquitlam don't need to see our municipal council meetings, and nor do they particularly want to. But it's important that they see theirs, and it's important that we see ours.
You're talking about partnerships, and this it just came to me. We had a couple of people who were visually impaired, and they came to the studio and said, could you get somebody to read the newspaper for us first thing in the morning when there's not a lot of viewers? And we said, well, I think so, probably. So we have 2 newspapers in town. We've been reading the newspaper now, I think, for the last 6 years. And it's the one program that we have at 9 o'clock in the morning. And if it's not on, by 9:05, we're getting telephone calls to them, because there's 4 or 5 of them, and that may be all that's listening, I don't know. But there's 4 or 5 of them that are sort of visually impaired to get together in one of the seniors' homes every Thursday morning and Saturday morning to listen to the reading of these 2 newspapers. And the newspapers, of course, love it. they love us for it. And just to add something to it, we've had to move out of a building that was sponsored by the town, and we're making the big move, in fact, next week. But one of the newspapers came up with an alternative for us and offered us a building that they actually had, and I'm sure it was because we had this sort of relationship with them, and they were quite happy to have us, in one of their buildings.
I had a question for Andre. I followed along most of what you said in French, I believe, but can you clarify, did CBC say that were they working with you to develop, like to train people on documentary filmmaking? Because wouldn't that be an interesting model if CBC, because they're missing this $130 million right now, played a more active role in trying to support community television with training? I mean, the fact that the beachcombers are now in Gibbs, that's an interesting story. That could be a documentary film. But the fact that you have all this talent, of former CBC people, even the CBC itself, and they have the infrastructure to support community television and to get grassroots program, or to help us in the programming. This programming, it could be a training ground or a fertile incubation ground for the future CBC producers and directors and writers and all that sort of thing. But it could also be for shows that achieve a certain quality level in the community media sphere could become CBC shows down the road. Locally, we have a fellow named Tom Green who had a pretty successful cable show and went all the way. He went to, I think it was MTV, and then now has his own career. And we've had other people who have come out of community television and done very well as well. Guy Madden, Dan Aykroyd apparently, and even Shania Twain I saw on TV as a 14-year-old. So anyway, can you comment?
The question is?
The question is, did you talk to CBC about, or have you worked with them on training? Yeah.
We met them at the AGM. Okay. So after that, we tell them what happened when we meet our team in the same place for the same interview, and they told us, oh, that can be great, and we can be partner. And they said, yes. Instead of put my team on the South Shore, can still in Montreal Island and do some news for us. You're gonna do the news for this part of the South Shore. But and we talk about them, but we got a little bit about money, and he said, but did you don't receive money for information from your cable company? We said, no, we have 2 cable company on our territory, and no formation, no equipment, no money. So, it's okay. So if I buy some news from you, it's not going to be in the path of the cable company. We said, for me, it's, if you want to give me money, it's not going to be in the same, I don't give a damn. If you want to give me money, it will be great for us. And since that time, we only have some email, and he told us that I have to spoke upstairs because I'm not sure if I can pay you because it's supposed to be the video. It's supposed to form you, supposed to give you equipment, supposed to give you the channel, and supposed to help you with your community to be on air. But I'm not close the file. I will try to do something. But since that time, a lot of things, we have a new government now, so I don't know what happened with that. If it's gonna, I'm not sure if it's gonna still there. This is Monsieur Cormier, because he'd like to also to develop something for documentary. It's too part of the game, but he said that maybe we can be part of your Quebec laboratory of documentary, and maybe we can part of your South Shore, and you're gonna give me news. If you can tell us that it's gonna be at the quality that we need to be on air, it's gonna be great for us. It's gonna be a beautiful collaboration. But it's like it's stopped by the upstairs because they said you're supposed to be everything there is supposed to be done by videos.
It might open up for a program proposal to them that, you know, if they could work across Canada with other community channels, it could be a way to support us. It just seems like with the ecosystem, the community media ecosystem that Dr. Ali was talking about in one of the sessions, that there's all these different groups doing things in their silos, and if they could actually somehow come together and coordinate, perhaps the public could get more value for their investment.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that obviously the policy in this area has to be clarified, right? Because there's so much confusion about community media and where it fits at the moment.
And local and community.
That's right, and the difference, as Christopher Ali said, between how do we define local versus how do we define community? There's so much ambiguity in all of this policy, and certainly at the moment, CBC does not have a clear mandate to make partnerships with community media, obviously, right? So I think these are questions that would have to come up, hopefully in the hearing that's coming, and it's really worth kind of bringing these examples.
But they have make one deal.
To bear.
I think it's 1 or 2 months ago with the community radio. They put some community radio on their where they cannot, where they don't have some radio. CBC put on air the community radio. It's almost them is from the Aboriginal people up north, but there's few of like Fermont and Quebec. So they have, so the deal is open. It starts with the radio. Said, start with that. Maybe with the TV, it's gonna come. Maybe there's something is open there.
Well, we're close to the end of the time. Gary Hoffman has. Gary's back. Go, Gary.
Just one small item, picking up on what Karen mentioned about transponders.
Transmitters?
No transponders,
transponder.
off of Telsat Canada's satellites. You were correct in when you said one analog signal coming off the satellite, they could, when they switched a few years ago to digital, which meant you could put 12 analog signals on one transponder now. Now, for us in the territories, for us specifically, when they did that, the price of our TV dropped by almost 50%. Having said that, I never did notice a drop in cable prices for you guys. Yet, you know, they can now put 12 signals on, one transponder as opposed to one. So your big cable companies, Bell, Shaw, etc., tell us, I'm sure your prices never went down. So anyway, but they go.
Mine went up.
But anyway, yeah, the Telsat Canada then would only be paying or only collecting a lot less money because now each transponder has 12 signals.
So that's 12 analog.
Sorry?
That's 12 analog.
No.
Well, then you're not getting digitals, are you?
Yes. The signals come. Okay, that's just the confusing part. The signals coming off the satellites are now in digital. Okay, they were a number of years ago in analog, but because of what's happening worldwide, they had to find ways to condense the bandwidth. Digital was the way to go. So Telsat Canada said, okay, gee whiz, we can do this. We can send out on one transponder now, we can put 12 signals. Okay, it comes down to you or to us in digital. It goes through our equipment, comes out analog. Because we don't have to change, and most small communities, you don't have to change to digital. You probably won't have to for many, many, many years. Again, if people read it, it was capital cities in Canada, populations over 300,000. If you fit in there, you went digital. If you didn't fit in there, you could stay analog. I thought it was quite simple, but it seems like the more people I talk to, that's still a confusing item. But anyway, the main part was our TV costs, because we pay the suppliers directly, like History Channel, Family Channel, etc. We pay them directly, and our prices dropped by, like, say, 50%. Is that clear as mud?
Somebody's making money.
Oh, yeah. You guys never got, when you're talking about all the cable companies, you never got a price drop. Anyway, that's more of an information item. Confusing.
Well, I guess we should close here unless somebody has another burning comment or question. I want to say I'm so inspired by the people who use bubblegum and bobby pins and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to commit to community media and put things on the air and online. Thank you all for what you do, and really happy to have this session. I think there was a lot of really good discussion, which I guess will continue outside. And tomorrow, don't forget about the policy forum tomorrow, which gets started around 9 o'clock or so in the morning. Thank you. Thank you, Cora.